Alright guys, this is where the patch note discussion comes in. This is the longest segment of the podcast. And I found this comment in the patch notes. You cannot announce design changes like that right when the most important event with otherwise unattainable BIS items ends. Expectations were low and have been tunneled into the abyss even still. Now I put this comment up first. This is out of the patch notes threads and what you guys have been talking about in chat for a while now. About the weapon skill changes, the initiative changes, the buffs here, the nerfs there, and I spent a lot of time sort of reading through that thread. But this was the first one that I wanted to put up because this guy is saying, okay, you ran this event, right? You ran this event. We crafted these rings to fit the parameters that we were operating under at the time, and right at the end of the event, you change everything. Okay. I will come back to that. First, a bit of history. Change is inevitable at one time. For example, at one time in the life of the server, city sieges meant something. Now, I'll tie all this together. But at one time in the life of the server, city sieges meant something. They were fun. They were unique. You had to do city sieges if you wanted to get the crest to buy the armor. Now they are ghost towns.
Hello!
Largely avoided and completely unnecessary, and they are. City sieges went from being something that you planned for, that you built warbands for, that you fought tooth and nail to try to get into, to now they're just pretty much ignored content, and they are completely unnecessary. You don't have to ever do a city siege to get all the armor that you want because they all drop the same crest. Okay, was that a positive change for the server? Okay, was that a positive change overall for the server? I think not. Alright, let me continue with this. I'll come back to your comment. Let me continue this. Forts are no longer unique, but players will still fight in them. Forts used to be... I remember the days when forts first came out, and they were, just to use a slang term, right? Forts were they were the bomb at the time. They were the shit, man.
Fast man, let me tell you my story, man.
You had to get into the forts. And people took them really seriously. Okay, well, all that's water under the bridge. But people will still fight in forts because the fighting in forts at least tends to be more fun than fighting in a city. Part of that is cities have restricted numbers, but forts are still fun to do. Okay, you can still have a good time. You can still get into some good fights. But they're not unique anymore. They're unnecessary as well. One time zone locks were hotly contested. I remember those days well, especially like when the new armor set came out. I remember when Conqueror came out, and Conqueror was the high-end armor that you could get at the time. Zone locks, the zones were, God, it was bitter, the fighting that went on. Was just massive, and it was hotly contested. Everybody wanted to get the bags, and the server just doesn't see those types of fighting anymore. Okay, so what's the unifying thread here? The unifying thread in these three examples: city sieges, fortress assaults, and in simple zone locks. Each one of these, as they have fallen to the wayside, okay, each one of these, as they become less and less relevant, have also coincided with a population base decrease. When city sieges went from being unique to giving the same crest as everywhere else, there was a population decrease. The same thing happened when forts lost their uniqueness. And now zone locks tend to fall into the category of whatever, man. They're great for the most part. They are just back and forth Zerg fights. which again had an accompanying population decrease. The emphasis is placed on rolling fights with little resolution. I did a few podcasts back, I talked about the blob and how the zone fighting has just sort of morphed or devolved is a better word, into these big blob fights going back and forth with little resolution. And especially in a place like Prague, where there's a central axis, or a nexus, right? There's a nexus, that's a good word, at Martyr Square that draws everybody in. Now, in truth, Prague has a lot of room to maneuver, and a lot of hiding spots, and a lot of line of sight obstructions. But nobody ever takes advantage of any of that anymore, right? Nobody ever takes advantage of that stuff anymore. It's too much trouble, I suppose, or there aren't enough people, or the people that are here are just interested in fighting the blob fight. I'm going to come back to the buff to art range DPS in a minute, but I really don't want to talk about this question about the patch notes being a response to the blob, maybe in part, perhaps in part, but I don't know. Like I said, I don't know. I just work here, but the central point is that, you know, all of these changes, and this one in particular, at one time all classes were unique in some form. That was one of the aspects of Warhammer that drew me to it and has kept me all these years, was that each class was unique in some form. Each class had its own associated strengths and then its own associated weaknesses. Each class could be exploited in that manner, right? Whether you were playing the class or fighting against the class. And the ability to make your particular class, the character you were playing, to make them unique was where much of the satisfaction of playing this game came from. Now, it appears, especially with this most recent patch note, it does appear that it's almost like, I thought of the word vanillification, right? Vanillification. It's a great leveling in one regard, in making everybody the same, an attempt to make everybody pretty much the same, I suppose. And I'm not saying that is the goal, but if that's the goal, that's a bad idea. Variety, another way to look at this, variety is the spice of life, and that truth applies to all forms of human endeavor, and that's all Warhammer is. Even though it's an MMO game, it is a form of human endeavor, and if everyone who comes to this game has to play it in the same manner or near the same manner to be accepted, then what's the point? Right? What's the point?
There is no point.
And again, I think that this leveling by design motif that's in play here is going to have the same result as the other examples that I gave. That people are going to stop playing. That's what I think is going to be the result. That's what I think is going to be the result. Or one result, I should say. One result of these changes is that there's going to be another drop in the size of the player base. And I asked this question 2 years ago. How many more hits can we take? How many more hits can we take before it no longer matters?
War. It's fantastic.
Now, somebody earlier in the Twitch chat was talking about Gravord and how part of the changes that were put in this patch note were designed to undo something he had did. Okay, I would just have to take y'all's word on that. And of course, that's fine. I would have to take y'all's word on that because I'm not as keyed into Gravord as some other people may be. So I just thought that was an interesting comment. Okay. This is also from the patch notes threads. Melee DPS is again in the negative, and range DPS in the positive. Soon the entire server will play on range DPS especially now magic ranged DPS is in the most advantageous position. I've talked about that before too, that I thought Sorks and Maguses, but in particularly Sorks, were kind of overtuned and have been for a while. Some of the damage that they can do, and I've got a damage screen coming up here in a moment, but that I thought they were just a bit overtuned and a bit out of hand. But this guy thinks that as a result of the patches, that if those who still play will just move over to ranged DPS because they'll be more effective there. Okay, I think that's true. An average played Sork would rotate around 7 to 8k damage in 3 seconds. An average Squig does around 6 to 7k damage in 3 seconds. Now, I didn't. You can find this post on the thread if you're interested in who said this. But 7 to 8k damage in 3 seconds, or 6 to 7,000 damage in 3 seconds from a Sork and a Squig herder. If they're focused on the same target, that means they can take down any target in the game in 3 seconds. In a double Squig, one Sork setup, this would result in 19k damage in 3 seconds, which order can counter only with 1k absorbs mid-air.
But wait! There's more!
Now, I'm not trying to argue the numbers because, I'm going to take this at face value. As a player, I've just noticed over time that both Sorks and Squig herders seem to be doing far more damage than they once were. In the last podcast, I gave specific examples of that, and in particular, fighting Sorks and using Wall of Darting Steel. You know how that has changed over time, and over time here, the Sork damage has gone up to a point that I think is just a bit. Well, it's a bit overtuned. If this wasn't a game made for ranged DPS before, this is another guy on the same thread. This wasn't a game made for ranged DPS before, and the guy says, laughing my ass off. And that's a number of people that are saying the same thing. That more people who continue to play are just going to switch to the ranged classes. Now, in any system, change is inevitable. But the general consensus seems to be this patch left much to be desired.
Yeah, no shit, Sherlock.
I think that's true. I'm not, as I talked about earlier before I started the podcast, my play time, the time I have to dedicate to this game, has been decreased lately and restricted. So I haven't been able to follow events, and haven't bothered really to follow events as closely as I once did. But all you have to do to know that this statement is true, that this set of patch notes left much to be desired, all you have to do is be able to read. You go into the thread, and that's all you have to do is be able to read, and you can tell what you get the theme and the tone and the tenor of what's going on. Okay, nerfing melee DPS even more is crazy. I don't have words to describe this insanity.
There is no curse in Elvish, Entish, or the tongues of men for this treachery.
I thought that fit pretty well. Melee DPS at one time was the most fun spec to play in the game. I believe that. That's why for most of my time here, I played Swordmaster, I played a White Lion, I tried a Slayer, I was just bored to tears. I've always thought playing a class where you had to get into your opponent's face was the best way to play. Alright, as a primarily two-hand tank player, I am not excited to hear about the weapon skill initiative change. Neither am I. This is Thargrim, I think said this. Right, this is Thargrim. I got another raid, thank you. I'm running my podcast, the Tothmonra podcast, and I am growing toward the end, but anyway. As a primarily two-hand tank player, I am not excited to hear about the weapon skill initiative change. Now here's my bit about two-hand tank play. Two-hand tank play on this server has been under assault for a long time. If anybody remembers, this was a long time ago, man. This was like 2018 or 2019 or something like that. The core guardability change that we went through, where two-hand tanks would only mitigate half the damage using guard that S&B tanks would. Now that didn't last, but they did try it, right? They did put it up. Two-hand tank play has been an object of disdain around here for years. It just has. Two-hand tank play has been an object of disdain around here for years. And a lot of changes have come down the pike over time to degrade the effectiveness of, especially the offensive effectiveness.
So why don't you make like a tree and get out of here?
All right, to decrease the offensive effectiveness of two-hand tanks. And I think they've finally done it. All right, another quote. So you really want people to delete their tank MDBS or melee class and roll a range class? Oh wait, people already did that. This is another theme that's come up in the thread a lot. In that, you know, I think that a significant number of people, if this stands, if these patch changes stand, I think there'll be a noticeable number of people who will just leave the game. Those who don't leave the game, I think there'll be a significant or noticeable number of people who will just start playing range classes. But here's the kicker, right? Look at this. Now this is a cherry on top of the cake, hands down one of the worst patches ever. I deleted this guy's name because I couldn't get in touch with him, but I now don't have hope for the balancing of the game. This is out the window. It makes me sad to see Return of Reckoning in such state. Years playing this game, and trust me, I've seen bad things happen, but this is too much. Makes me want to not play the game and find something else. But I love this game so much, it just saddens me. I hope that the dev team in charge of these changes will listen to the people and not apply these changes. Yeah, good luck with that. Please stop balancing the game in a negative way. You just make people quit their characters and make the game less enjoyable. There are other ways to balance it. I think he's exactly correct. You make the game less enjoyable. I talked about the Serpent's Passage changes earlier as an example of exactly that. But he says, I hope the dev team in charge of these changes will listen to the people and not apply these changes. Like I said, good luck with that. Rest in peace, Perry. Angenolian in. Yes, we need more RDPS here. More and more and more. Delete all melee characters. Yes, Angenolian, that's true. Alright, so this is a pull quote I took out of that. Makes me want to not play the game and find something else. Well, I wish I'd put my commercial here, I guess. My the commercial I showed just a couple of minutes ago. I wish I'd put. I'm gonna have to pull that out and make it more accessible. That was pretty cool. But you know, there are guys and there are people in the chat right now. There are people in the chat in my Twitch chat right now who I freely admit, okay, can discuss the numbers better than I can. All right. My point is, based on these changes and based on the reaction to these changes that I've seen, it's going to have a broad negative effect on the size of the player base. It just is. And that's what bothers me. Now, I mean, there are some specifics about it, like the assault on the melee DPS, just like Angenoli just said. You know, sort of nerfing the damage that they do. Again, you know, that ticks me off. But what really bothers me the most about it is that the result is going to be fewer people who want to play, and of the people who play, more of them will go to, you know, different classes. The nature of the game could change. The nature of the game itself could change. But given the recent pattern in response to changes and patches, I doubt the powers that be will listen to the player base at large. I just do. I don't think, you know, I mean, the patches were done. They're out there. People are talking about it. Will the people listen? Note the context of the term at large. What I mean is the player base at large, those of us who just want to have fun here, just want to enjoy the game, as opposed to being listened to the chosen few, right? The chosen few on the inside.
Shout! Shout out his name!
Nothing about the gods is good. Even the world smiles at you. Once you can believe the
I talked about this in depth in the last podcast, so I won't go into it again here. This is Thargrim. I'm sorry. This is Thargrim's comment. This completely breaks all two-hand tank builds. Okay, well, I talked about a little while ago that's been a goal for a long time. Two-hand tanks have been under assault for a long time in many different ways. And I think in reading over it, and I wish I could play two-hand. I talked about that earlier, that at the moment I still don't have all my armor that was lost in the bank vault glitch. But this completely breaks all two-hand tank builds. And to that, all I can say is mission accomplished, right? Given the history of the server, one could look at that statement and simply say mission accomplished. That's exactly what they wanted to do. All right. I had to tell it like it is. This does not appear to be a popular patch. But, yeah, given the history of the server when it comes to two-hand tanks, I think if what Thargrim was saying is true, that it breaks all the two-hand tank builds, all I can say is mission accomplished. They've been trying to do that for some time now. And that's a shame. Two-hand tank play, especially two-hand Swordmaster tank play, was a lot of fun. I mean, it was a lot of fun. Okay, sorry, I had to take a drink there. All right. Now, here's another possibility. I remember the days of Torquemada, and I talked about this once before too, but in Torquemada, you could always tell what class he was playing at whatever time, because that was the class that got the most benefits, I suppose. The same was true with the White Lions when Secrets was playing. But you could always tell what class Torque was playing, because those are the ones that all of a sudden became so damn powerful, right? And I suppose there may be a little of that. There may be a little of that has crept into the design, because that also falls under the category of human nature. It's just human nature that if you have a vested interest in something, that your personal desires and beliefs will creep into whatever it is you're doing. Or perhaps the patch changes simply are enforcing the silent rule of the server: thou shalt play your class in the approved manner only. Right? That's been sort of the silent rule for some time around here. Thou shalt play your class in the approved manner only. I was up against that for a long time. Two-hand Knights was a lot of fun too back in 2018. Yeah. This is a let's make everything more tanky, which is similar to the whole SC changes. This best laugh out loud is, everyone asking for White Lion pet pathing to be fixed. If it was ever going to be fixed, Secrets would have. Yeah, the White Lion, the White Lion pet pathing. That's one reason. That's the primary reason. The two primary reasons why on my White Lion I always played AOE spec. One, AOE spec is just more fun. I found it more fun. But the other one was the pet was always just so buggy, right? All right, so I've kind of talked about the patch notes. You guys have talked about the patch notes, and I appreciate it. Again, know that I understand, and I freely admit, that some of you can talk about the numbers better than I can, but I'm talking about the overall effect. I believe we could be headed for another mass exodus if this all stands, I should say, if this all stands as introduced. I believe we could be headed for another mass exodus, right? Another loss of players, and I'm not sure how many more of those can we take? Says Teeth complains all the time. It's why squig hunters have literally every utility humanly possible. Teeth is a guy that in all my time here I've only talked to once, and I've talked to him once under my entire time here, and that was just to Cindy Mattel to apologize for calling him a dickhead one day. But that was the only conversation I ever had with the guy. But I do know that the powers that be, he's one of the people that the powers that be listen to. I also know that part of the reason that squig herders play the way they do is because of his input, right? So I hope people don't leave. I really do. I hope people don't leave. But it wouldn't surprise me. All right, one last quote on this particular topic, again from the patch notes threads. Whoever thought this up obviously didn't look at the ramifications fully.
The Tothmonra podcast is made possible through a grant from the Umbrella Corporation.
Help Umbrella Corporation protect our worldwide investments. Train with our elite security team, travel to exciting locations, and begin your new life. Submit a video response or leave a comment telling us why we should recruit you. Remember, Umbrella has you covered.
Danger. The emergency disrupt system is now activated. The ship will detonate in T-minus 10 minutes. The option to override automatic detonation expires in T-minus 5 minutes.
Serious. Against the Jets last week, Buffalo Bills running back Thurman Thomas broke O.J. Simpson's career rushing record, and the week before, he surpassed Simpson in career touchdowns. Next up for Thomas, an attempt to kill 3 people at once.
Police in Queens were searching for a suspect who hijacked a bus and then immediately crashed it into a utility pole. Okay, so we know it's a woman.
But you have not seen what I've seen.
I have seen my share.
You have not seen what I have seen.
I have seen my share.
You have not.
I have.
You have not seen what I've seen. You have not seen what I have seen.
And frankly, it's important. Even if the lace is dry, and even if you don't touch the body of the shoe, bacteria and virus migrate from the sole up.
You see this on TV?
I gotta watch TV to figure out the world.
That's the end of the war.
I still think Porky's a murderer.
Show's over, show's over, show's over.
And remember, sex, gender, woman, not a woman, infinity.